So the portion, we started last week. We didn't actually do the portion last week because we spoke about Tisha B'Av last week. But in terms of the sequence of the parashiyos, we're in the book of Devarim. We started Devarim, Deuteronomy last week, and this parasha is Va'eschanon, second portion of Devarim. So the book of Devarim is not a narrative. There's no narrative. It's not a storyline of the ongoing wandering and the journey of the Jewish people through the desert, but it's a recap. This is what we look at, how we look at Sefer Devarim. It's a recap of the entire story of the Jewish people through the desert. And it's Moshe giving his farewell speech to the Jewish people, because we know he's going to pass away. He's not going to merit to go into the land of Israel. And he's giving his last speech and inspiration and admonishment to the Jewish people. So the whole book of Devarim basically has that particular theme. So it changes this. There's a different, I guess, style and different theme, different thematic style of how it's presented. So there's a lot of powerful messages, and also some new mitzvahs that are introduced as well in the book of Devarim, interestingly enough. Even though, as we've discussed before, all mitzvahs were given at Sinai, but certain mitzvahs, well, I'll take that back. Certain mitzvahs were not, were given as they were traveling through the desert. But certain mitzvahs are introduced for the first time in the actual text of the Torah over here, even though they may have been given beforehand to the Jewish people. As we know, the oral tradition contains much more than what's written in the Torah, in the written law. But anyway, so one of the themes of this portion is the Ten Commandments. There's a recap of the Ten Commandments. But I'm not going to focus on that. The second major theme of this week's portion is the Shema Yisrael, the Shema prayer, which we say every single day. So I'd like to spend some time talking about the Shema. It's such an important mitzvah. And I know we've spoken about it before, but every time I learn it and I discover new ideas, and it really inspires me to go through the topic once again. So everyone knows the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And I think we can say that the Shema itself is considered the national anthem of the Jewish people. It's the national anthem. And when I say everyone knows the Shema, everyone is familiar with the word Shema, but in terms of knowing the actual words, what they mean, and to say them, and the regular familiarity of them being recited every single day, not as many people do it. So my wish and goal for this discussion today is that for all of us to go up one notch or two notches in our connection to the Shema. So if we already do say the Shema on a regular basis, then we should have a better appreciation of it, what we're saying exactly. And if we're not saying the Shema, I would encourage everyone to, and I'll share a link afterwards. It's a very short paragraph. It's actually 3 paragraphs. I'm only going to focus on one paragraph of the Shema, but at least the very first paragraph of the Shema, to say that and to make that a regular practice, which takes all of maybe 1 or 2 minutes every single day. It's so important. And as I said before, it's described as the national anthem of the Jewish people. It's the most important prayer. And when we look at the course of the Jewish day and the course of the Jewish life, the Shema Yisrael prayer comes up so much, and it's so ubiquitous in all of Jewish life. So, for example, there's a mitzvah to recite the Shema twice a day. That's a biblical mitzvah, and that's actually sourced in the paragraph of the Shema itself, which we'll come to later on. So it's a biblical mitzvah to recite the Shema in the morning and in the evening. As it says, b'shachbecha v'kamecha, when you lay down at night, and when you get up in the morning, to recite the Shema, to recite these words. And then, in addition, that's a biblical requirement, but in addition, there is also the rabbinic requirement to say the Shema when a person goes to sleep at night. So even if a person has said the Shema in the morning, at night, to fulfill their biblical requirements, still nonetheless, a person, when they're going to sleep at night, before they fall asleep, and sometimes the challenge is to say it before you fall asleep, because if you're like me, I fall asleep in seconds, thank God, and I have to remind myself to say the Shema even before I get into bed. Otherwise, as soon as I put my head on the pillow, I'm finished. So, but that's a requirement also, to say the Shema before going to sleep. As a person's falling asleep, to say the words of the Shema should be on a person's lips. And then elsewhere in the prayer services, we have the Shema again in the morning prayer service after the morning blessings. So in total, a person would be saying the Shema actually 4 times a day. So even though biblically it's only twice a day, morning and evening, but if you add in these additional places, going to sleep at night, and then also in the prayer service in the morning, before, after the blessings, before you've come to the major section of the rest of davening, where the main mitzvah Shema is found, there's an additional place over there where the Shema is printed as well in the Siddur. And then another place where we say the Shema, at least part of the Shema, is in the is when we take the Torah out of the Ark on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So that's done every Shabbos and Yom Tov as the Torah is being taken out of the Aron. And then also in the Musaf prayer, the repetition of the Shemoneh Esrei, the Musaf repetition on Shabbos and Yom Tov, also the Shema, a line of Shema is inserted in there as well in the Kedusha, and the repetition of the Shema of the Shemoneh Esrei. And of course, the famous one is at the end of Yom Kippur, in the Elah. Shema Yisrael is belted out loud and so intensely with a lot of emotion at the end of Yom Kippur. Not relevant nowadays, but in biblical times, when the Jewish people would go out to war against their enemies, the Kohen would prepare the Jewish army by saying Shema Yisrael with them all before they go out to the army, just to go out to fight. And then you have the very painful and horrific situation where a person dies al Kiddush Hashem. A person is faced with a threat from an enemy to be killed. Otherwise, they'll they have to renounce their Judaism. Otherwise, be killed. So many Jews died in the gas chambers saying Shema Yisrael. This is the last thing a person is supposed to say. I mean, that's also a reason why we should really know this, because the very last words on a person's lips before they pass on to the next world should be Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The person should know those words. The deathbed as well. And of course also it's in the mezuzah. The Shema is inside the mezuzah, it's inside the tefillin. So the Shema, right, I got it, okay. So the Shema is all over the place. It's all over the place. It's the national anthem. We have to know it. We should know it really. So knowing it is, knowing at least the words is one level, but our goal today also is to have a deeper appreciation of it. So I want to read to you a few things. One I just saw in an article this morning. This is written by Rabbi Meir Zlotowitz. I think he's the major editor of the Art Scroll series. So I just like this paragraph he wrote. Morning and night, the Jew shuts his eyes and proclaims the Shema. God is ours and he is one. Life's most meaningful moments are punctuated with the Shema, when he dedicates his new day and surrenders to helpless sleep at the unknown night, when the Jew prepares to read the Torah on Sabbaths and festivals at the climax of Yom Kippur, and at the culmination of life when his soul leaves its earthly host. In the mezuzah, the Shema sanctifies his home, and in his tefillin it sanctifies his intellect and strength. And God himself thanks Israel, as it were, for declaring his uniqueness by means of the Shema, as though it becomes fulfilled through us. So this, very beautifully written. And the Shema, because of the power it has upon the Jewish soul. There are stories. One story over here, I have over here, a story by Rabbi Silva. Rabbi Eliezer Silva was a rabbi, lived during the Holocaust, and he came to America, and then he became a rabbi in Harrisburg, and then his son became the rabbi following him. So stories told over here in the Second World War, and there were many young Jewish children who were harbored by a myriad of monasteries throughout Europe. At the end of the war, the Vad Hatzalah sent representatives to the monasteries to try and reclaim the orphan children to their heritage. Many of the children who found refuge did so at a young age, and they had but a few recollections of their birthright. So when Rabbi Eliezer Silva, who was the rabbi of Cincinnati, Ohio, and a very influential member of the Vad, he came to a particular hermitage in the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, he was met with hostility. He says, "You could be sure, Rabbi, if we had Jews over here, we would surely hand them over to you immediately," exclaimed the monk in charge. "However, unfortunately for you, we have no children. We have no Jewish children over here," the monk said. But Rabbi Silva was insistent, and he was given a list of refugees and was told that they were all Germans. The monk continued, "Yeah, the Schwartzes are German Schwartzes, the Schindlers are German Schindlers, and so on and so forth." Rabbi Silva had been told that there were definitely close to 10 Jewish children in that hermitage, and was not convinced. He asked if he could say a few words to the children as they went to sleep. So the monk agreed. Rabbi Silva returned later that evening with 2 aides, and as the children were lying in their beds about to go to sleep, they entered the large dorm room. He walked into the room, and in the sing-song that is so familiar to hundreds of children, hundreds of thousands of Jewish children across the globe, he began to sing Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And unexpectedly, in mid-sentence, he stopped. Suddenly, from 6 beds in the room, the ending to that most powerful verse resounded almost in unison, Hashem Echad. He turned to the priest. These are our Jewish children. We're going to take them now. The children were redeemed, placed in Jewish homes, and raised as leaders of our community. Because, a child who's raised with this on their lips, on his mind, and on his heart, so never forgets it. And it has to be etched in the person's heart. It needs to be etched in the person's heart. And this is what saved their lives. So we appreciate how important it is. This is the national anthem. It's the mantra of our life. So to explain a little bit the technicalities of the Shema. So I said before, I think we did have a class several weeks ago, Parshas Balak, where I spoke about the 4th paragraph of the Shema. I don't know if you remember this, the 4th paragraph of the Shema. So when I say the 4th paragraph of the Shema, really there's only 3 paragraphs of the Shema. But there was a consideration by the sages to insert one of the sections of the portion of Balak inside the Shema as well. And that's why I said jokingly the 4th paragraph of the Shema. So it was funny because when I was giving that class to someone else, to some other people several weeks ago, so I said, how many paragraphs are there in the Shema? So he said 4. I said, what do you mean 4? So I thought maybe he already knew what I was going to say about, the 4th, the extra, the mysterious 4th paragraph. So how many? He said 4. I said, why'd you say 4? He said, Shema Yisrael is the 1st paragraph. The 2nd paragraph is V'ahavta, and you shall love Hashem with all your heart, with all your soul. The 3rd paragraph is V'hayim Shemoah, and the 4th paragraph is the portion about the tzitzis. I said that's not true and that's the mistake sometimes people make, is if you look in the Siddur, it looks like there are 4 paragraphs. There's only actually 3 paragraphs. The 1st paragraph is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And then right away, and if you have the Chumash, it comes from this portion, as I said before, chapter 6, verse 4, I think it begins, chapter 6, verse 4 of Devarim. Let's see, one sec. Yeah, verse 4. So the first verse 4, Hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem is the only one. The second verse is, you shall love Hashem your God with all your heart. In the Siddur, it looks like 2 paragraphs because between the first line, between the first verse and the second verse of the Shema, is an extra line which is added in, at Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso L'Olam Va'ed. Blessed is the name of God, of his glorious kingdom forever and ever, which I'll come back to in a few minutes why that's in there. But that's not really part of the Shema. That was added in by the rabbis later on. But the Shema, the first paragraph of the Shema, is, Hear, O Israel, and then the next verse, you shall love Hashem your God with all of your heart, etc. So that constitutes the entire first paragraph. The second paragraph is not in this week's portion. The second paragraph is taken from next week's portion in Parshas Eikev, and that's in chapter 11, verse 13, where it begins, it will be, if you will hearken to my commandments I command you today, to love Hashem your God, etc., etc. It goes on. And I'll talk more about that next week because it happens to be also in the 6th Aliyah, according to our sequence. I'm not going to focus as much on this second paragraph, but that's the second paragraph of the Shema. And the 3rd paragraph of the Shema is taken from the portion of Shalach, which is back in the book of Numbers, and which talks about tzitzis. And over there that's the 3rd paragraph of the Shema. But all put together, I'll read to you what the Rambam says. Maimonides says, one first reads the paragraph Shema, the first paragraph, because it contains the commandment of the unity of God, love of God, and learning, which is the great principle upon which everything else depends. So that's the first paragraph. The theme of the first paragraph is unity of God, love of God, and learning Torah, which is so important. Afterwards, in the second paragraph comes, it shall be, if you listen, the second paragraph, which commands regarding all the rest of the commandments. And the 3rd paragraph, tzitzis, the reason why that's put in, one of the main reasons, Rambam says the reason why it's put in is because tzitzis is also a reminder of all the commandments as well. So the entire 3 paragraphs of the Shema encompass the entire spectrum of the foundations of Judaism, belief in God, the 13 principles, and it contains much more, as we'll see in a few minutes. But the major principles of belief in God, all the mitzvahs, and that's what the 3 paragraphs are about. But again, we're going to focus just today. Oh, one more thing actually on all 3 paragraphs. On all 3 paragraphs, actually 2 more things. 3 more things. Okay, looking at my notes over here. 3 more things on all 3 paragraphs. Another thing over here is the Medrash says that Rebbe Mani. Whenever I say the word Mani, I'm always thinking about a friend of my parents, Manny Morris. I don't know if you remember him, Mrs. Green. Yeah. So Rabbi Mani, that's where the name comes from. Rabbi Mani says, don't take the reading of the Shema lightly, because there are a total of 248 words inside the Shema. 248 words. What does 248 remind you of? It reminds you of the 248 limbs in the human body, which, including the phrase, blessed is the name of his glorious king for a kingdom forever and ever. But there are 248 words altogether, and these correspond to the 248 limbs of the body and the soul. God said, if you guard the 248 words of the Shema and read them properly, then I will guard your 248 limbs in your body and soul. So there's a tremendous correspondence of self-preservation and well-being, both spiritual and physical, the guarantee from Hashem. If a person takes care of the 248 words of the Shema, then Hashem will take care of us as well. Another very big idea in the Shema is that the Talmud Yerushalmi says that inside the Shema there's an allusion of the 10 Commandments as well. So we have the 10 Commandments in this portion, but in the entire 3 paragraphs of the Shema there's an allusion to the 10 Commandments. So I'll go through them quickly. I am the Lord your God is clear. That corresponds to hear. The first one is I am the Lord your God corresponds to hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. The second commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. That's the Lord is one in the Shema. The next commandment is don't take God's name in vain. So that corresponds to you shall love Hashem, because one who loves the king won't swear falsely in his name. The next one is remember the day of Shabbos. Remember, so you shall thus remember. I'm not going to go in the second paragraph. It says you shall remember. So there's the correspondence to the 4th commandment, honoring your father and your mother. In the second paragraph of the Shema, it talks about how if a person keeps these mitzvahs, you and your children will live long and endure on this land. And we know that the promise of or the reward of honoring parents is longevity. So if a person is a child, they should know, make sure to honor one's parents. It's a promise for longevity. If you have children or grandchildren, get them to honor you, because that guarantee. You just tell them, listen, get me my slippers, because that's your guarantee to longevity. Don't murder. I'm not going to go through all of them. The Yerushalmi corresponds all of them to get to the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments are also alluded to. So again, this underscores the tremendous importance of it. The one which I really like, the concept which I really like, is in the Shulchan Aruch. In the Shulchan Aruch, which the Code of Jewish Law, which has a very, very large section discussing the Shema. So this is chapter 61 in the Shulchan Aruch, where it focuses on the how much a person has to be very careful and precise in reciting the Shema. So the Shulchan Aruch writes, Yikra Kriya Shema B'kavana, person should say the Shema with focus and intention, Be'ema, with reverence, with yira, with fear, Bereses V'zia, with trembling and trepidation. I mean, that's amazing. Like, how many people say the Shema with that type of emotion? Person should say the Shema with reverence, with fear, with trembling and trepidation. And then citing the second verse of the Shema, these words which I'm commanding you today should be upon your heart. These words which I'm commanding you today. What does today mean? So he writes over here. The Chavetz Chaim writes beautifully. I mean, it doesn't. It's not his. He doesn't. It's not. It comes from an earlier source, the Torah. It says the following: L'shavya inish l'kriya Shema b'chol zman. That a person should relate to the Shema every single time when he says it. The korile k'prutgama chadasha, like he's reading an edict from the king. He's getting this Shema, this document, is something which has been sent by the king to all of his provinces, to all of the subjects in the country, and I have to think about it. This is an edict from the king. V'yachshav b'liba, I have to think inside my heart. Ilu melech basav adam, if a king, flesh and blood, shaleh pritgam b'chadash, would send a brand new edict to all of his subjects, b'vadai yekol b'nei medina karmosa be'em v'yira, then certainly everybody would be reading it with trepidation, with reverence, and with fear. It's a new law which is being disseminated among the people. You'd be reading it with a lot of trepidation and reverence. Kal v'chomer l'kriyah ulamosa, with the Shema. This is the edict of the King of Kings, blessed be He, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everyone has to read it with care and concern and trepidation and reverence. And the reason why it's compared to this edict is to tell you, don't say it quickly. Don't say it like in a choppy kind of way, where you're mixing the words, where you're not pronouncing the words properly. But patience and slowly, word by word, with pause between every idea, the next idea. Again, like a person who's reading the edict of the king, a person will be reading it very, very carefully and very slowly. Called Sivui, every commandment, every instruction by itself, to understand it properly. That's how a person has to say the Shema. Called Sivui v'tzivui, every single instruction, every single onesh, every single consequence and punishment which is mentioned inside of it. Yosim alibo, he has to put to his heart to understand it. This is the commandment of the great King of Kings, blessed be He. So this is the type of atmosphere of saying the Shema. So it's like if we're not saying the Shema at all, so I encourage us all to say the Shema, to know the Shema, to say it, to have it on. There's so many ways you can have it. You can, whether it's in the city, you can get printed cards of the Shema. If we are saying the Shema, slow it down and try to understand, like get an English translation, understand what you're saying, and slow it down and say it carefully with reverence, with respect, and with a true understanding of what you're saying, to be able to inculcate it inside our minds and our hearts. So this is what it says, and that's what's alluded to in the phrase, these words which I'm commanding you today. It's brand new today. This is the first time you're getting it. Like you're getting it today. Say it with that degree of reverence and respect. So that is the general idea of the Shema. Let's go into some specifics of the Shema. Some things I may have said before in previous years and previous times, but it's always good to review. So the very first line, Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So that's the first line. That's where we are expressing the unity of God, the belief in God. And the truth is that the words Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is jam-packed with so many foundations of our faith, of our relationship with God, what God is doing in the world, how we're supposed to relate to Him. So very quickly, Hashem, the name Hashem, is Yud Kei Vav Kei, which has a double meaning. It means not only that God was, is, and will be, He surpasses time, He's beyond time and space, but also in the pronunciation of Hashem Adokoi, I'm saying the word Adon, which means master. He's the master, He's the true ruler, master over everything. So He's in control. Well, He's the master. He's what we would call it, quote unquote, the CEO of the whole universe. The whole universe. He is the master of the entire universe, and He was, is, and will be. That's the meaning of the word Hashem. Elokeinu is our God, means we have a personal relationship with Him. He's our God. He's not just out there. He's our personal God. And the word Elokim denotes the pervasive and comprehensive power that He has. In contrast to being a master may not have comprehensive power. A master may just be able to give instructions and commands to all of his generals and all of his members of his kingdom. But the fact that God is Elokim, He's the master, has complete control and power, describes a different dimension of Hashem. And He's our God, Elokeinu, and Hashem Echad, He is the one and only one. So that's what we're supposed to be thinking about in saying those words. The word, though, Shema Yisrael, is interesting because why do we have to declare our faith in Hashem by saying Shema Yisrael? So one reason is, Shema means hear. Why do we have to focus on the hearing? So one idea, which I remember learning from my Rosh Hashiva, my Rebbe's Rebbe, Rav Hutner, is the ear, the uniqueness of the ear is it's the most passive organ in the body. It's the most passive of the senses. It doesn't do anything. It's acted upon. It doesn't act upon other things. It's acted upon. The sounds just come inside the ear. The eyes, you can move your eyes, you can turn around, you can look what you want to look at. But the ears, you can't block sounds out. The ears just absorb, and the ears are symbolic of being passive and submissive. So one idea of that is we're supposed to begin the Shema by adopting the attribute of the ear to be passive and submissive to God in that acceptance of the yoke of heaven upon us. That's one idea. Another idea, which I saw this morning, is that Shema Yisrael is almost like I'm talking to other people. I'm talking to the Jewish people, talking to everybody else. So what is that about? So if we skip now to the next sentence, love Hashem with all of your God. So we always understand loving Hashem love Hashem with all of your heart, with all of your soul. That's the simple meaning of love Hashem. But the Gemara actually says the following. When it's on the words, you shall love your God with all of your heart, the Talmud says this means that the name of heaven should be made beloved by you. So when it says love Hashem, it also has a connotation. Heaven's name should be made beloved by you, meaning to say you should learn Torah and Mishnah and serve Torah scholars and do business pleasantly. Because what will people say about you if you act this way? People will say, praiseworthy to his father who taught him Torah. Praiseworthy is his teacher who taught him Torah. Woe to those who don't learn Torah. This person who learned Torah, look how beautiful his ways are and how perfect his actions are. So in addition to loving Hashem, it's not enough to love Hashem. I have to make Hashem beloved to other people as well. So the ultimate expression of loving Hashem is to a point that the whole world loves Hashem, which is a call, which is a mandate that I should behave in ways which really reflects that true love of Hashem. I'm not just doing it for myself, but I'm doing it in a way which creates a belovedness of Hashem to the entire world. So that's what. So one commentator says that's why the Shema begins. Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, because it's not a myopic, self-contained, endeavor of me coming to a greater understanding of Hashem, but I have to come to an understanding of Hashem in a way which radiates out and projects out into the world. Shema Yisrael, hear Israel, hear O Israel, Yidden, Jewish people, you should all hear Hashem. And I have to make myself a beacon of light to make sure that everybody hears Hashem and hears the love of Hashem. So that's the Shema, that's how it starts off. So it's a tremendous idea that right away, as we start the Shema, we're not looking at ourselves as individuals in our own little private space. We're looking at ourselves as part of the community, and we are projecting outwards and making Hashem beloved to the entire world. So that's another reason for the phrase Shema Yisrael. Going further forward through the Shema, as I said, we did the names of Hashem. And then we have the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus. I said before, that's inserted. It's not part of the actual Torah requirements of saying the Shema, but it's added in by the rabbis added it in. There are two reasons given. One reason given is because, what's the earliest origin of the phrase Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? So one might say it's in chapter 6, verse 4 of Deuteronomy. Truth is, no, the Medrash says that the first person to ever recite the words Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is actually the tribes, the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob before he passed away. Medrash says that before he passed away, so Jacob wanted to reveal the end of days to his children and give an actual date of when the Mashiach is going to come. So when he was about to do this, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was resting upon him, making him ready and able to be able to reveal and divulge the end of days. But then all of a sudden the Shekhinah departed from him, and he wasn't able to tell them. He didn't know. He couldn't figure out. He didn't know at that point when the end of days would come. And he thought maybe the reason why the Shekhinah, the divine presence, left his bed was maybe because the sons, his children, had some kind of flaw, some kind of fault inside of them, and that was restricting his ability to have the divine revelation. So he turns to his sons and he says, "Is there some kind of fault with you?" And they said, no, back, "No. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad." They recited those words. They said back to their father, Yaakov's other name was Yisrael. So they said, "Shema Yisrael." Listen, Yisrael. Now I don't understand why they didn't say our father. That's a separate question. But they addressed their father by his first name, Shema Yisrael. Hear Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Just as Hashem is the one and only one to you, He's the one and only one to us as well. And there's no fault in us. And the reason why you're not getting this prophecy of when the end of days is going to come is for a different reason. It's not because there's any flaw inside of us. But that's the first time that the word Shema Yisrael was recited. When he heard that, when Yaakov heard those words and that reassurance that they were moral and ethical and spiritual and on the same level as him in terms of their belief and commitment to Hashem, he responded with a resounding Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem Kavod Malchuso L'olam V'ed. Blessed is Hashem, whose glorious kingdom is forever and ever. That was his response to his sons. And because of that, the rabbis felt it was a good thing to add those words in, because Yaakov said that in response to Shema Yisrael, so we should also say it. But on the other hand, the Gemara says, Hashem doesn't say it in the Torah, or Moshe doesn't say it over here in Devarim. So if Moshe didn't say it, maybe we shouldn't say it. But if Yaakov said it, maybe we should say it. So a compromise is, say it, but say it in an undertone. Say it quietly. So we say it in an undertone to respect Yaakov, but also to respect Moshe. So that's why it's put in there. So and then there's a lot of more discussion about that. We can have a whole class just about that. But the second reason the Medrash gives as to why we say it, a whole different reason, is when Moshe went up to the heavens to receive the Torah, and he was first taught the Shema Yisrael himself, it says he heard the angels who were saying back to God as he was teaching Moshe Shema Yisrael. The angels were responding back with Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso L'olam V'ed, again them praising Hashem. So Moshe brought this back down to the Jewish people, and he taught them Baruch Shem, but not to be said as part of it in the actual paragraph over here, or not to be said in the same way, because since the angel said that, he said, say it anyway, but say it in an undertone. But we know that on Yom Kippur, we say it out loud, because we're like angels on Yom Kippur. So since this, according to this Medrash, the angels are the source of Baruch Shem, so we're like angels on Yom Kippur, therefore we say it out loud on Yom Kippur. So that's the reason for that. Moving forward, we go to the next. I'm not going to go through the entire first paragraph. I want to probably more focus on this last thing over here, which is the next. Actually, you know what I'll do is this. Let me go through the whole. Let me just review the entire paragraph and then go backwards and focus on one more thing in more detail. It's, I'm just speaking from my own experience, my own feelings towards it. It's so beautiful. It's so, when you're focusing on the first line, Hashem our God, Hashem is one. Again, meditating on this idea of what our beliefs are, understanding that Hashem is in control. The next one is loving Hashem with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might. And I'll come back to that one in a second. The next one after that is these words should be upon your heart, and you should teach it to your children diligently, and speak about these words as you're sitting inside your house, as you're walking on the road, as you're traveling. If you're going on a vacation, don't put on the radio, don't put on music, put on Torah anytime. Put on whatever, there's thousands and thousands of shiurim which are available as you're traveling along the way. Make sure Torah is traveling with you. And then tie them as a sign upon your arm and put them as fretless between the eyes. So it's attached to the physical body. That's the tefillin. And then finally, write them on scrolls and put them on your doorposts. The Shema should accompany us wherever we go. That's why this is such a powerful paragraph. But let me go back again to this line. Love Hashem with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might. With all your soul and with all of your might. So what do those expressions mean? So the Gemara says that that love Hashem with all of your heart, with all of your emotions. Put yourself into it. Don't be academic. Don't just be an intellectual. Be an emotive and an emotionally connected to Judaism. Work on ways in which it can be brought down into the emotions as well. And then b'chol nafshecha is to be prepared. And this is a horrible thing to think about. But as the Chavetz Chaim says over here, and it's based upon the Gemara, that the proper fulfillment of this is to imagine. Persons should even imagine themselves being threatened with their life, at pain of renouncing renouncing their faith in Hashem, and be prepared, because that's what Jews have done throughout the centuries. They've given up their lives for the sake of their belief in Hashem and their belief in Judaism, and that's the martyrs of Jew. We read about this on Tisha B'Av. We read about it on Yom Kippur, the 10 martyrs, and these are very hard things to think about, but these represent those people. Rabbi Akiva, they represent individuals who have given their entire selves, their entire lives for the sake of their Judaism, and that's what we're supposed to do. A Jew is supposed to be prepared to sacrifice his life in order not to commit idolatry, not to commit adultery, and not to commit murder. A person has to be willing to sacrifice his life. That's what it means, b'chol nafshecha. Nefesh is life force. A person has to be prepared to give the life force up for Hashem. It's an amazing idea. And then the last one is me'odecha, our wealth, our possessions. We spoke about this last week, to be able to look at our possessions as merely gifts, and they've been assigned to us, they've been relegated to us, but the purpose of our possessions is in order to use them for the service of Hashem, for doing mitzvahs with them, using for mitzvahs. And the other understanding of the word modecha also is related to the word midah, attribute. So the Gemara says that with the same type of midah with which I blanked out of this one. I forgot what this one is. I have to come back to that. There's another understanding of that. But let me now go back to the first one, b'chol levavecha. B'chol levavecha, so with all of your heart. So I said briefly, with all of your emotion, put emotion into it. But the obvious question is, when you look at the Shema, is the actual word levavecha is ostensibly spelled incorrectly. That's how it appears on the surface. Of course, it's not spelled incorrectly, but the word leiv, heart, is spelled with one vet, vase. So if you're saying properly grammatically with all of your heart, you would say b'chol libecha. Instead, the verse says b'chol levavecha with two vases. So this is a very famous drasha, and the Gemara says in Brachos, Tractate Brachos, b'chol levavecha, with all of your heart. Why is there two vases over there? Because b'shnei yitzarecha, serve Hashem, love Hashem, b'shnei yitzarecha, with both of your inclinations, with both sides of the heart. What are the both sides of the heart? Well, one side of the heart is the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the other side of the heart is the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara. So therefore, serve Hashem and love Hashem. It's easy to love Hashem with your Yetzer Tov, with your good inclination, but also love Hashem with your evil inclination. So what does that mean, love Hashem with your evil inclination? It sounds paradoxical, it sounds like a complete opposite. How do you love Hashem with your evil inclination? So one explanation which I saw, I think it was just really, I've been thinking about this for several days now. This is an explanation given by the Or Yecheskel. His name was Rabbi Yecheskel Levenstein. He was the Mir Mashgiach in pre-war Europe, and he says the following, that just to understand, what is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination? So the evil inclination we tend to look at as being this evil, menacing, terrible force which is residing inside of us, which accompanies wherever we go. And it is true that we have this force of evil in the world. There is the concept of Satan, of Satan, which exists in the world, or the force of evil which exists. However, it's very, very important, he says, to understand the true root and the real cause and the real origin of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. In fact, the word Ra, evil, is spelled with the letters Reish Ayin, which means Re'ah, which also means Re'ah, which means a friend. So in the phrase "V'ohavta l'reacha kamocha," love your neighbor as yourself. So the word for neighbor over there is also Reish Ayin. Reish Ayin, the same word for Ra, evil. So that sounds interesting, isn't it? That Ra, evil, is the same word as Re'ah's friend, as neighbor. So it gives us a little bit of a clue as to the deeper dimension of what Ra really is all about. But he tells us that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination which is nestled inside of us, really comes from our neshama. It really emanates from the neshama. Meaning that all of our inclinations, whether good or bad, all are rooted in the soul, in the pure soul, our inclinations. What happens though, because there is a energy, there is a cloud of Ra, there's almost this kind of this atmosphere of Ra, of evil in the world, which even comes because of a higher purpose. So what happens is that's the outer shell which surrounds us, which is further away from our neshama, and all of our good inclinations, which are all intrinsically good, sometimes they get distorted and channeled in wrong directions, and it comes out in the form of the Yetzer Hara. So, for example, the example he gives is jealousy. Jealousy. So is jealousy bad or good? Well, it says in Pirkei Avos, it says there are 3 traits which destroy a person's life: kina, jealousy; taiva, passion; and kavod, in the pursuit of honor and egocentrism. So these 3 traits are very detrimental to our lives. They can ruin our lives. So jealousy is the first one, kina, jealousy. So you'd say jealousy is an evil trait, brings us our downfall. But the reality is, jealousy really comes from, he says over here, jealousy really comes from, I want to read the words exactly. It says that it's a muhus koach ruchani. It's a spiritual, pure force inside of us of hashlama im yerida, with a dissatisfaction with descending downward. Jealousy is a dissatisfaction of falling down and descending down, and going lower down and going away from Hashem. Meaning that any time that I sense a yerida, a descent, a spiritual descent, that's what actually triggers jealousy. So when I see in somebody else that they are higher than me, and I could be higher, so I'm jealous. That's what, in a positive sense, what's happening is I'm recognizing the potential that I have and the fact that this other person has more than I have. So I would like more as well, and that could also manifest itself in physical things as well, in material things. Shleimus in life, perfection in life, doesn't just mean perfection spiritually; it means perfection in everything, developing everything. The whole world should be developed, as in the expression tikkun olam, rectification, improvement in the entire world. You know, as we said so many times, Judaism does not de-emphasize the importance of developing the world and having a healthy and a good world. So any time that there is any recognition of a devaluation of what I have, so that's really coming from this the soul's desire to want to be shalom, to be perfect, to have shleimus inside of myself, and that's what can create jealousy when it's distorted, when it channels through the forces of evil which are hovering in the world. It can be distorted in the form of the terrible jealousy which we see, and the bad reactions that it brings about, and the jealousy among people. But to understand that the root of it is this lack of, or this frustration with this dissatisfaction of having shleimus inside of myself, a lack of wholesomeness, a lack of perfection. That's where jealousy comes from. So he writes that all negative traits are all rooted in a pure spiritual force. Here's another one: taiva, passion. Passion, how destructive passion is. You know what passion comes from? Passion comes from passion for Hashem, for devekas to Hashem. People who have more taivas, more uncontrolled, unfettered expressions of their physical passions in many different areas. The one thing in this, all the Hasidic commentaries write about this, in particular, Tzadok Cohen writes about this, that people who have challenges when it comes to this area of physical passions and lust and all these kind of things, they have to know that is really, the origin of that is their desire to connect to Hashem. They have a tremendous passion and energy and fire inside of them to connect to Hashem. And it gets channeled in the wrong direction. It gets it gets shunted. It goes in wrong directions. It comes out in negative manifestations of lusting after things one should not lust for. And then the same thing going back with jealousy. It's having jealousy for things we shouldn't have jealousy for. But the goal of our goal is to realize that these negative tendencies are really coming from pure spiritual places inside of me. So he says, when it says in the Torah, love Hashem with your Yetzer Hara as well. It's exactly this. You have a Yetzer Hara for X, Y, or Z, whatever Yetzer Hara is. I was thinking to myself before I started the class, maybe I should try and go through every imaginable Yetzer Hara I could think of and try and give examples of how you can trace it back to a positive source. But I think I can't. It's going to take me forever to do that. I think it's something which we have to think for ourselves. Whatever our Yetzer Hara is, to try to think about what positive source is that coming from inside of me? What is the positive neutral force that is coming from inside of me? When I say neutral, I mean not negative. What positive source, spiritual force does it come from? And use that and now rechannel that energy towards serving Hashem. That's what it means to love Hashem with your Yetzer Hara as well. Not the actual, evil Yetzer Hara, but the root, the origin of that Yetzer Hara. I know my Yetzer Hara very well. So just look at I look at my Yetzer Hara, I look what it's doing. So if I have a tendency towards this, towards that, towards this and that, etc. So fine. So now let's try to tunnel down to try to find the spiritual root of it, the positive spiritual root of it, and now use that to serve Hashem. It's a beautiful idea. I just found it to be so inspiring because it's another reminder. It's another reminder that everything in the world is to serve Hashem. Everything, even all the negative things which we see around us, everything ultimately is rooted in something which is good. How it works out and how everything is good is beyond our understanding many times. But everything in the world is good. And even when tragedies strike, it's somehow there's a message, there's a silver lining, there's something which is behind it. And even, I was sharing this actually with my wife a couple of days ago, and we were talking about how, you look at historically throughout Jewish history, you look at where Mashiach comes from, when the Messiah comes from, the origin of the Mashiach comes from an illicit relationship between Yehuda and Tamar back in Bereshis. So how does it happen? And then I was learning also, Shmuel Beis, the book of Samuel 2, goes through the very, dramatic stories of King David and Bathsheba, and the illicit relationship there as well. And that's also a precursor to the building, to Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, the building of the Beis HaMikdash, etc., etc. There's so much paradoxical good which comes out of negative that it just seems to be incongruent with our understanding. We're in the evil. We're in this negative space right now. I'm surrounded by this Yetzer Hara. I'm reading a story. I'm hearing a story. I'm hearing about a tragedy, and all of a sudden, and in this tragedy, I'm supposed to now think about positivity. Well, we don't see it right away. When it comes to our Yetzer Hara, we have to try to find it. We have to find that spiritual root, the good root inside of it. When it comes to tragedies in life, we have to wait. We have to wait until the light shines at the end. We can look retrospectively and see how great good came from darkness. And this is the whole course of history. Light from darkness, good from evil. It's not a prescription, or it's not an invitation to go ahead and do evil and just say it's okay. And we have to be very careful with this, because a person could say, well, if all good is going to come, ultimately all good there's only good, and only good can come from evil as well at the end of the day. So then a person can say, okay, fine, so I'll just go ahead and do whatever I want to do, because good will come from it anyway. You can't do that. That's not our allowance. We have to focus on what our obligations are. Leave it to Hashem how the good is going to come from it. But we have to focus on the obligation which we have in front of us. So I just want to end with a story where, of light from darkness and connected to the Shema. So I had a friend in yeshiva many years ago. His name is Fivish Adams, and he was, I lived from New York, and anyway, so he was he is a Baal Teshuva, and he lives in Monsey, has a family, grandchildren, and a big family today, and his brother also is a very religious man and big family, and they live in New York, so I'm not sure where they live anymore, but, so that story of how Fivish became religious, and how his brother became religious, Fivish told me the story himself. He said that, I guess this goes back to the 1970s approximately. And Fivish's brother, was living in LA and visiting his sister. And the whole family was not at all connected Jewishly at that point. And he was giving her a ride somewhere, and she asked if he could stop off somewhere at a certain location. They go to this location, and it was a very sleazy area. And it was not so far away from the ocean. So they're in the car, and she gets out the car, and he's waiting inside the car, the brother. And then two people come over to him with a gun, and they put a gun to his head, and they get into the car, And they probably thought that he maybe had money, or they had drugs in the car. There was some kind of mistake, whatever. But they get in the car and they drive him off. And they drive off and they leave the sister is left behind, and they drive this brother. And the brother was actually tied up and put in the back of the car. And it's well known, this particular part of California near the ocean, it's well known that, murders take place there, and people are basically killed and just tossed off into the ocean. And that's what this brother thought, and he was just terrified, and he was being driven off, and he was held at gunpoint. And I'm trying the whole story, the details of the story I don't have exactly. I'm just giving the sketches of the story. So he's driven. They drive off, and they get to the ocean, and he knows this is what they're going to do. As far as he's concerned, he's going to be shot dead and tossed into the ocean. And the way Fivish told me the story is as he was taken out of the car, held at gunpoint, and he was walked along the pier, and with a gun at the back of his head, and he just, as far as he was concerned, that was it. He was finished. His life was over. And he knew nothing of his Judaism. The only thing which he knew was Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He just knew those words. And he figured his life is over, and, that's it. So, and, he just was terrified, and he just blurted out, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And as he said those words, the way apparently he felt like this tremendous light surrounded him. And the next thing he remembers is he's swimming around inside the water, and holding on to this pole of the pier in the water. He wasn't shot. He was pushed off into the water, but he wasn't killed. But the surreal experience that he had, and he had this feeling of light surrounding him when he was saying the Shema, and he was able to scramble up onto the pier, and whoever drove him out there were gone. And he was also stripped naked as well in the process. So he comes out onto the highway and onto the road. And eventually, someone stops and takes him, and he's brought back to the community, whatever. And this began his journey, because he realized something happened at that moment, and saying the Shema was what really saved his life. And he ended up learning more about Judaism, and he became very, very religious. And he ended up going to yeshiva in Staten Island, and he became a great Torah scholar. A Torah scholar. I mean, I don't know if a great or whatever. He became a Torah scholar. And he now lives. Last I heard, he lived in Borough Park, and he was teaching physics in a yeshiva in Borough Park. That's what I last heard, or science, whatever. And that's what inspired his brother to become religious as well. So there are many stories like this of how the Shema has this power, and it's because it's our national anthem, it's our mantra, it's what really bespeaks and expresses what we are, who we are, what our relationship with Hashem is all about. But we should, and every time we learn the Shema, there's always more to learn about it, and it never ends. And again, to end off with, if we're not saying the Shema, let us say the Shema. Let us say the Shema at least once a day, twice a day. Make it a practice in the morning. It takes literally 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Maybe I shouldn't say that, because that actually goes against what I said before, said slowly with patience. Okay, so it takes about an hour. I'm just joking. No. So if you said slowly with, if you look at the Chumash, the first paragraph is only how many? 4, 1, 2, let's see, 1, 2, whatever, it's 6 verses, 5 verses. It's a tiny paragraph. But if this is what we say, this is what the Jew says, this is what saved those Jewish children during the Holocaust. This is what saved this man before his death. And this is what a person says before he passes away, and she says before she passes away. And this is what we say all the time throughout our liturgy. And it's on our doorposts, it's on our tefillin. Then let it be on our hearts as well. And, we should all merit to really absorb the message of the Shema, and it should transform our lives for the better.